Hello and welcome everyone to Global Minds, the Harvard Alumni for Global Development podcast. This is your host Vivek. Here in Global Minds, we invite global development professionals from different walks of life and talk about their experience of trying to make the world a better place. Today, for the inaugural episode, we have the pleasure of having the founder and recent president of the Harvard Alumni for Global Development itself, Stephen Chiu. Steve is currently the Deputy CFO of Save the Children US. He has previously led corporate strategy, finance, partnerships, and business development for organizations like Medical Teams International, World Vision International, Fannie Mae, and PwC. Really great to have you as our first guest, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
I want to start with how you got into this field of, global development or humanitarian work. I was looking at your CV, and it seems like you did your BA in sociology, or I think they call it AB at Harvard, and then you got into management consulting, and then you went on to pursue your MBA, and then somehow found yourself in this global development field. How did that transition happen, and why?
Yeah. Well, thanks again for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk a little and share a little bit about my background and my perspective. You know, very simply, it wasn't planned out. If you were to ask me as a first day of Harvard where I would be 10 years, 20 years out of after graduation, I would never have said in global development. I will rewind though to those first few days, that first week or so when I was in Cambridge for the first time. I remember that I actually was very interested in sociology. Actually, my brother's good friend, my brother went to Harvard as well, and his good friend said, if she could do Harvard again, the first thing she would do would be not to major in biochemistry. It was way too difficult and exhausting, but she would have done sociology. And so I asked her, well, why sociology? And she just described some of the classes and topics. And so I immediately signed up for Social 101 as my first class as a Harvard student. And the first day, this guy named John, he was a professor for Social 101. He stands up, he's like 6.5 feet tall, wearing this sweater vest, very Harvardish. And he says, for those of you who want to major in sociology, there's mainly two career paths for you. You can either be a management consultant doing strategy consulting at McKinsey, BCG, and Bain, and one of those kind of corporate strategy firms, or you can be a social worker and you can kind of work at the Red Cross or Habitat for Humanity or something like that. And those are mainly your two career paths. And so I come back from that class, go to lunch, and go like, I want to do both of those things in my career. I just have no idea how it's going to happen. So that's week one of Harvard. When I graduated from Harvard with a Harvard sociology degree, I then decided to go into management consulting. It was the path of least resistance. There were hundreds of different consulting firms on campus. The career services did a great job in making sure that people who wanted a job in consulting could get one. It was not the same case if I wanted to get a job in a nonprofit, specifically in the area of strategy or finance or whatnot. There wasn't really those paths that Harvard had offered at that time when I graduated. Now, things have changed, but at that time, it wasn't really an option of strong availability. And so I graduated, moved to New York City. The consulting firm I was in was healthcare focused. It was actually started by a Harvard grad as well, who was very much interested in how do we change the world through healthcare. And so it was domestic focused, and I was really excited by it. And I learned a lot, but it had nothing to do with international development. I then rolled into another consulting firm, and then I went to to Berkeley Haas for my MBA. And when I was there, I was still intrigued in social impact, social enterprise, but I did not have really I should think about the world around me. It just never really occurred to me until another Harvard friend of mine, a guy named Gilbert, he works now at I think Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. He basically said, "Hey, you're going to grad school. Why don't you travel around the world, explore, meet some of my friends?" He had worked at USAID for a while, or US OFTA for a while, and he was like, just meet some folks and explore the world around you versus this bubble in the U.S. And that's really when I started to meet folks, go on different experiences to India and the Philippines and Uganda, and just started to broaden my very, very, very narrow perspective. And so from there, moved to grad school, did some other jobs in corporate strategy, but eventually found my way into World Vision, and that's where I worked for the first 15 years of my career.
Yeah. What has been like the most rewarding or exciting part of this, career for you? What keeps you going in this work?
There's different things. I mean, I think it's hard for me to boil it into one. And also as you develop different experiences and have different relationships, things change as well. But I would say the first few years when I got into it, I did enjoy. I grew up in the Boston area. I grew up in a small town called Hingham, or near Braintree, the end of the Red Line, and I had not traveled outside the U.S. that much. So when I started my World Vision, it was literally every quarter I was on the road for about a month or so, and I'd hit two or three or four countries, work with and visit all the different programs, talk to all the national leaders, finance and programs and operations, and I just had I loved that experience of learning what different wonderful programs are being set up, understanding the challenges and the opportunities that I could kind of infuse my perspective, and I really enjoyed that. At this point in my kind of career and age now later on, I for me that is not as important as kind of building a sound, sustainable, scalable kind of business, the business side of a global development organization. For me, that's really more fascinating. It's kind of like instead of being the driver visiting different sites around the world, it's really building the car or the engine underneath the car, and that's what I find more fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. What about the challenges? What kind of like personal challenges have you encountered throughout your career?
Um, Share this story later in person someday if we ever have to meet in person. My first experience in global development, I was volunteering doing an internal audit for a microfinance group. Um, Sunday I landed in Manila. Sunday afternoon I was in no, I was in Jose Rizal Park in the city. By that afternoon, I was drugged and I was taken to a private house for whatever things to happen to me. But literally, um, I was saved and taken to a nearby hospital. And so that was literally the first day of this volunteer project that I was on. And this was even before World Vision. So I, I've learned from my stupidity and realized that a lot of mistakes that I make, but then there's a lot of things that I can learn about the people in the world around us. And so it's just a simple example of how there's so much to learn and grow from all the people that are around us, um, and to learn from lessons that you have in life.
Yeah, no, totally. So, we learn many things in school, and often that is supposed to prepare us for the career ahead. And there's a lot of discussion about workforce development and competency based education. And my personal field is also education. I recently did my master's in education and I'm working in the education field. So I'm very curious, how do schools and educational institutions prepare us for careers ahead? And I wanted to ask you, what about your education, say particularly at Harvard? What part of that did you find most helpful during your career? What prepared you the most for the kind of work that you ended up doing?
So when I was at Harvard, I mean, I majored in sociology. One of the primary reasons I majored in it was because it had the fewest required classes. So it allowed me to take as many classes that were not requirements as I wanted to. So I took all these host of different classes. I took a lot of philanthropy classes because I was really interested in that. Took a lot of classes just around on different aspects of the world, but the one class that I did that was very much global development focused was on global food supply, and kind of as an advanced economics class. That was the worst class I've ever taken in my not worst from me doing extremely poorly. I mean, it was actually fascinating to sit there and learn about how food pricing and dynamics are, um, happen, and trends and implications and drawing graphs and whatnot. But that for me, it was horrible. I just did very poorly. So I would have gone back and probably taken more economics classes. However, what I did really like those classes. I would have wish I taken more of them. Um, Over the course of my years, I wish I had talked with more students who were taking those classes versus go in and out because I had my own extracurricular activities that I was involved in. So I just didn't take advantage of both the classes, office hours from faculty and research staff. I didn't take advantage of all the networks of all the students from around the world. And I did stay a little bit in my bubble, which I do regret. But now, I mean, there's still a lot of opportunities from Hagdy and whatnot to meet a lot of classmates or people who weren't even there on campus when you were there. And I think that's great.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Harvard Alumni for Global Development is part of that initiative, which will come in just a little bit.
sure.
But would you still recommend, though, to recent graduates to like pursue a career in this field or at least explore global development work?
I mean, everyone comes with a different perspective and different passions and interests. Um, the question that I've done a lot of kind of informational interviews over the years. In fact, there's a time right when I started Hagdy, it was almost like every month, every other month. So another college grad or recent grad was going to be asking me like, what should I do? I just graduated math and economics, and applied math and economics. I don't want to go and work at Mercy Corps or something like that. And I'd be like, well, what do you have to offer that's a tangible skill? And so oftentimes I do recommend people to build out technical skills, whether it be in finance or accounting, or whether it be in economic development or in healthcare, and getting an MD and being able to actually apply technical skills to the global development sector is, I consider, extremely useful. Otherwise, oftentimes what I see with people who don't have those technical skills, like graduating with a sociology degree from Harvard, has no value from my perspective for folks who want to go into global development. There wasn't really a lot of technical skill that I had to offer. Um, so you don't get placed into a lot of great opportunities. You get, I would say, and even myself as a hiring manager, take folks who don't have as many technical skills, and they do a lot, no offense, kind of paper pushing and a lot of reporting, which is very important. Um, but the actual, from my perspective, there's a lot of exciting work kind of done on the cutting edge for people who have a lot of technical skills. So build
Hmm.
it out in the private sector if possible. Global development sector is very much potentially to a fault, leans on the expertise of people from the private sector side, and as a result, it gives opportunities for people to jump in and really take a leading edge in the field if they're coming from outside.
Hmm.
Yeah,
All right. Let's come back to the Harvard Alumni for Global Development then. When did you start it, and why?
sure. I realize looking back at my calendar, and I don't know if you keep notes of all of your emails, but 10 years ago, we started Harvard Alumni for Global Development. And how it's a long time ago. I realized when I look back, I was like, oh, it was just a couple of years ago. But no, there's 10 years. And the amount of people that have participated, and that I've enjoyed their company through the years has been incredible. But it started really simply as my problem. I had moved I'd finished graduating from Berkeley from Haas, moved to DC because I wanted to get a job into global development. Took a job at Fannie Mae in the corporate sector in U.S. domestic strategy consulting because I didn't have the network to go into global development, but I thought in DC I'd meet people, just kind of walk down the street, you'd meet people, which is true. But if you don't have an actual inroad or connection, it doesn't exist. So um, when I moved to DC, I was still trying to make connections and networks. I went through the Harvard Online Directory. There were very, very few people who put their kind of sector of interest as well as their organization. So there's really nothing that I could do to reap the benefits of connecting with Harvard alumni. I go to the Harvard Club of DC events, and they were oftentimes very social events. So you'd meet people who were staffers or different people who would work for technology consulting firms. But I just had no idea how to connect with people in global development. Um, at the same time, Harvard Alumni Association was starting to build out the alternative to regional clubs, which they call shared interest groups. So if your interest is in a cappella, or if your interest is in environment or climate science or whatnot, you can start to build a network of alumni in these spaces. And so I said, why not? I really do want a job in global development. Why don't I get started and build a network for Harvard alumni who want to transition into the field mid-career, early in their career, later when they were retired or whatnot. So that's one of the main reasons that I started. It was a very personal reason. Like, I'm trying to get into this field. I want to help people who have the same problem as I did. And we also recognize that there were a lot of great Harvard alumni who are in global development, but just don't have the time and capacity to help bring other people along who are Harvard alum. So that's the background.
Yeah. Uh, could you tell us more about what HACD is now? What are its objectives, values, missions? What is it's doing, and all that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I recently stepped down over I think December 31st was last day, turned it over to Zaina. Um, what we started and what I hope we continue is kind of in this mix of four areas. One is in the area of networking. So, what are the ways that we can build networks with people who are Harvard alumni of different years, different disciplines, of different organizations and sectors? How do we network across? If you graduate from the divinity school and you want to connect with someone in the med school or the faculty of arts and sciences, what are the ways to build those networks? At the same time, what about careers? I mean, one of the guys that I was talking to when I first started, he had graduated 35 years ago from the college, and his daughter was starting college, and he was like, his daughter wants to go into global development, but he wants to figure out how to work with Hagdi to think through what are the technical, the soft skills, all that. What would fit into the ideal profile for the new graduate trying to build out their education and experiences to be an excellent career, to have an excellent career in global development. So it was kind of like an aspect of what does careers look like, not just to get a job, but to help prepare people so that they are equipped to for the right career path, whatever that is. So careers is another area. Research, I think that there's an incredible amount of research that's not done by Harvard, all the incredible faculty of Harvard and the research and grad students, but done by practitioners who are alumni and who don't necessarily share that outside of their own bubble of their organization or their talking circles, or this talking circuit of which they go around from webinar to webinar. So, are there ways to use Hagdi to share some of that research, practical research? And then finally, the area of partnerships. How do we partner with one another within our respective organizations to for connections, not just for that, but also for business purposes, for winning grant opportunities, for launching local um, programs around the world? What are the ways that we can set up partnerships between Harvard alumni? So those are the four areas that we started with. There's some aspects of them of those four pieces that are currently in Hagdi. A lot of it has been focused on careers and research and networking. Obviously, through COVID, things have shifted around a little bit to a lot more online, but we do hope to have more and more revert back to in-person events. So we'll see where things go over the next few years. I'm really excited with where Zane is taking things.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned four areas: career development, networking, research, and partnerships. The transition, you mentioned you recently stepped down as the president, and now we have a new president, and things seem to be evolving in Hagdi. Is there anything in particular that you're most excited about or looking forward for Hagdi?
I am looking forward to listening to all of the podcasts that you'll be putting forward. You know, I'll say this. One of the reasons why I kind of kept at it with Hagdi over the last decade was I found these conversations with different people so fascinating. Honestly, it's like the kind of thing that you go, oh, let me think about what I want to ask this guy because it's the most fascinating background, or what he or she does is really incredible and profound. And so, listening to some of your podcasts, I'm looking forward to that. The types of people that you want to bring in, the diversity of what people do after they graduate is phenomenal. I am That's one of the areas that I'm very much looking forward to.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's also, my personal interest in running this show is, I get to meet all these interesting people, and I'm at the start of my career, so I think I personally will get to learn a lot of life lessons and advice during these conversations. So, and it has been a great conversation with you today. I think we want to close this. But I think just reflecting briefly on our conversation, it has especially been fruitful, maybe perhaps for those who are like looking to get into global development, like someone like, who recently graduated or is about to graduate or is thinking of a career change. I think your insights and your experience was particularly insightful in those areas. So thank you so much, and hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Bye bye.